Last time you and I spoke, Gemini 3 was coming out, and I think safe to say it's been a success. From your vantage point, you're looking out and you're seeing, you're probably already thinking about Gemini 4, I'm going to ask you about, but did you expect Gemini 3 to put you back in the pole position that it did? Or was there a little bit of trepidation even towards the release?
You never quite know when you're baking a new model, right? You obviously have your theories and you have your tests, but I think we were already on a very good trajectory already. If you look at 2.5, it was topping a lot of the leaderboards, back in, I guess we released it in April, May. And I think if you were sort of charting our trajectory over the last couple of years, I think we were having the fastest progress of the kind of core model capability. And then, Gemini 3 series has sort of borne that out. And then, of course, it's a ferocious, intense competition, as you know, so no one's standing still. Everyone's trying to leapfrog each other, so one can't rest on our laurels. And, this year we hope to accelerate even further.
Tell me as much as you can about Gemini 4. What are you already thinking about?
While we're kind of training the current generation, we are at the same time scientifically investigating many new ideas and exploring new ideas. And then when the time comes to, the training compute's freed up, you have those ideas sort of ready to go. And then you have to kind of judiciously pick which ones are going to fit together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think certainly when it comes to pre-training, I think we have the best team in the world by far, and sort of I think that comes from actually our innovation capabilities at Google DeepMind, which I think we have the deepest and broadest bench of anywhere in the world on terms of the fundamental research. And so we bring that to bear on the production systems.
Do you see meaningful gains in pre-training ahead?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
We haven't, we've never stopped on that. And obviously there's pre-training, there's post-training, there's thinking, or each one of those, there's a lot of headroom, I would say. We see a lot of gains still to be had in pre-training. I think this is also not only our innovation capacity, but also we're very rigorous with our science and how we test things out, from data organization to the architecture. And I think that is especially important in pre-training.
How much are you focused on continual learning? That was the thing that Ed and Rollups this year, a lot of people were talking about, and I know you've talked about it, but how much of that is a focus for this year with Gemini?
It's a big focus. It's something we pioneered, online learning and all of those things a long while ago now. We've got back in when we were working on games, Alpha Star and Alpha Go, these kinds of things, Alpha Zero. I think that's what's missing from today's systems. One of the things that's stopping us getting to AGI is online learning, continual learning, learning from experience, rather than sort of baking your system, then it's static and shipping out into the world. I think it'll be, a real game changer for these systems to learn and adapt. And it's probably what's needed for agents to really work well as, being delegated full tasks. They have to kind of learn from feedback in the wild. So I think that's a big focus for us, yeah.
Some news you all had recently was the Apple partnership and Gemini being in the background of the next Siri. I'd be curious to hear from you the significance of that partnership, and also, is that a sign of a deeper partnership to come? I know Apple doesn't like when people talk about partnerships.
Yeah, look, we're very proud of that. It's an important collaboration. They ran a very rigorous, evaluation process, and Gemini came out top, and for various aspects. And also, we have a lot of ideas for efficient versions on the edge devices that could be pretty important as well, I think, for phone and also for robotics. But it's a very important partnership for us, and there's been a long history of partnership with Google and Apple, and I think we can build on that with this partnership. So we're very excited about helping to power that ecosystem too.
How do you think about where to put Gemini on other distribution services devices versus keeping it for Google's first-party devices? I think we may see the return of Glass this year, right? The Pixel phone obviously exists. How do you think about where you want to partner with Gemini versus keep it for yourself?
Yeah, it's always it's a kind of case by case basis. There's complex kind of factors involved, as I'm sure you can imagine, of exactly that, the trade-offs of powering up your first party products. But we also want to do really well in enterprise and take a big slice of that market, including deeper partnerships where it makes sense, and the partner itself has an incredible ecosystem. So someone like Apple, but also Samsung, and I think there's got to be a mixture. I think we still have an advantage in some ways on our first party because we can more tightly integrate the loop between the product surface and the underlying model, which is difficult if it's two different parties. I think to get that level of integration and feedback.
I've heard there's prototypes of the glass rebirth already being used internally at Google, and Gemini is a huge part of the experience.
Yes, of course.
What is the opportunity there? How is Gemini going to make that form factor different?
Yeah, I mean, look, of course, Google, as you know, has had a huge history with, maybe they were too early actually with Google Glasses back in the day, one could say. I mean, it's sort of amazing to think it was 10 plus years ago. And I think there was two issues with it. One, the form factor was a bit too chunky and the screen was very small and so on. But I think the main issue was, what was the killer app? And I think a kind of this idea of a universal assistant that I like to talk about, something that's assisting you in your daily life, but across all of your surfaces, whether it's on computer, on your browser, on your phone, and then eventually on devices like glasses, I think is the killer app for smart glasses. And so I think the time is now, and I think only now has the technology got good enough to be able to be used in that way, actually with things like Gemini 3. But we've always had this in mind. That's why Gemini from the beginning was multimodal, because I wanted it to be a great model for things like glasses. We used to call it Project Astra when it was in prototype, and actually understanding the world around us, the physical world around us. And of course, the other thing that's going to be incredibly useful for is robotics. And that's, I think, the missing thing to make robotics.
Which I want to ask about, but first, the other thing you all announced recently was personalization in Gemini, where it can hook into Gmail. I think you said on X that one of your favorite use cases was the YouTube summaries that it can do. And I'm wondering, does that signal that context and unique data is the defensible moat in this assistant race?
Look, I think that's definitely, we feel that's one of the differentiators. I don't think it's the only one, but I think it's one. Obviously, people opt into doing that. I think they'll find their assistant to be unbelievably useful if it can understand you better. The dream I always had is that, have an assistant that knows you well enough. It can recommend things to you, whether that's books, films, restaurants to go to, trips to take, maybe even friends that you'd like, to enrich your life. There should never be a case where I'm doing a transatlantic flight and I'm in want of a book to read, a great book to read. There's obviously way more books out in the world that I would enjoy than I'm going to have time to read in my lifetime, but it's just making that connection. But there's also incredible productivity things too. We've launched, not only do we launch personal intelligence, we also launched AI Inbox, a beta version of that. And that's something I'd love AI. I've always dreamed about AI helping with his email admin. I mean, I'd love to use my time way more productively and that to be taken care of and triaged. And I think these are all, amazing use cases for AI.
I think we're in the product phase of AI where the models are obviously still progressing, but I'm curious, like from a product perspective on the Gemini front, you guys have been shipping a lot, and where you see the assistant race kind of shaking out. I know you're very competitive, and ChatGPT is still the biggest, but Gemini is taking market share.
Yeah.
And so I sometimes wonder, is this zero sum? How much room is there for multiple, go to throughout the day assistants? Will people use multiple? I think people like us always will, but will the mass market? How do you think that's going to play out? Do you see it as zero sum?
No, I don't. I think it's unclear currently. I think it could be, there could be enough room for 2 or 3 players. I think the market overall is growing, and it will grow with the capabilities. I think today we're still scratching the surface of what future assistants will be able to do. So I think there's no doubt the market will grow, but there is a ferocious battle as well for market share. I think both are important. We've got to grow the overall pie, but we also need to have a bigger market share. And there's still a lot of work to do. We are very pleased with the progress. We've gone from something like 5% to 20% in a year, which is great. But we need to, there's still a lot of hard work in front of us. But fundamentally, I believe in the fact that it starts with the technology and the research. If you have the best models, the most capable models, and they're improving at 50%, 100% a year, that will make people switch if they can really feel a difference in the capabilities in their daily lives.
I was a bit surprised to see ChatGPT add advertising before a company like Google, given that is your all's historical business model. How do you think about advertising in this form factor?
Well, it's very interesting to see what will happen. Of course, everyone's sort of looking at that and thinking about it. It's interesting they've gone for that so early. Maybe they feel they need to make revenue more short term. I think there's an interesting balance here, which is that if you want a true universal assistant that you can trust and is personal to you and has a lot of knowledge about you, I think you'd want to know for sure that the things it was recommending to you were genuinely good for you, right? And sort of unbiased and untainted. And I think if you start mixing that with advertising, it could work, but you just have to be very careful about how that's done. I think there are many ways that could be done badly.
Will Gemini's chatbot have ads?
We don't have any plans at the moment. We're focusing on the core experience and the core technology of being a better assistant first and foremost, in a much wider range of things and in more form factors.
How are you balancing running the research and the commercialization push that you feel now with all the competition? Having that strong research culture you talked about, which is obviously it's objectively true that you guys do, but you're also very commercially motivated, right? You're part of Google, and your remit at Google has expanded a lot in the last few years. So how do you balance that? How do you keep researchers and also ship?
I think you've probably been tracking and others about how our culture's changed in the last couple of years, and I think it's really good progress we're making on that. This sort of shipping culture and almost like a entrepreneurial startup mentality. A lot of intensity, a lot of focus, saying no to things, distractions, increasing the velocity and pace of the shipping. A lot of that's also part of its cultural mentality wise, taking more risk, calculated risk, and being comfortable with that. But also a lot of its infrastructure, actually re-architecting, almost Google 2.0 under the hood so that you can actually ship the quality of your models extremely quickly, in some cases SimShip, to your main surfaces, search, Gemini app, Chrome, YouTube, and so on, all of those things, cloud, they're all coming online. And that requires some change in the way that you even build software, because it's a new thing. You're shipping a model, and that's different to a normal piece of software. And so that's been actually very enjoyable. And I think we are getting a lot of benefits in research because that loops tighter. So we're getting immediate feedback from millions of users about how, the research is going, and that gives us research ideas. So there's actually quite a virtuous cycle there. But you've also got to, I think of myself as a scientist still first and foremost, and you've got to protect long-term research and the space for exploration that may not yield immediate results in 6 months, right? And, maybe it's more a 2-year time period. And we've always historically done that really well. We've invented a lot of the technologies that the modern industry relies on today, from deep reinforcement learning, AlphaGo type things to obviously transformers most famously. And we need to, be in the right position to invent the next versions of those. And I'd back us to do that to the extent that they're needed to get to AGI. So I'm always balancing both those things together. And, as you know, I'm a hyper competitive person. So if there's a leaderboard to climb, I'll climb it.
Yeah. Do you feel constrained by compute like all the other labs?
We are. I mean, everyone's constrained by compute. There's both on the serving side. Actually, we're in an amazing position where the demand for Gemini models, both from enterprise and consumer and our first party products, is huge. But also, you need a lot of compute for training and also for exploration and long term research. So I think no one has enough compute. We're no different. We're compute constrained. We've got way more ideas than we have compute for. But we're probably less constrained than other people because of our TPUs, and we've also got a cloud business. I think we're the only organization that has a frontier lab, cloud business, and first party building user products all under one house.
You have talked to me and others about the AI bubble and where you think the bubble actually is. And you've been saying for months now that you think it's in these very large seed rounds for these neo labs, right? And I think we saw the fragility of that with thinking machines recently, and how the talent is such a critical part in what happens when that talent leaves. Do you feel a little vindicated?
We're a lot of us are good friends, and want to see people succeed. So I didn't have anything particularly in mind when I was thinking about that, but it is an example of some fragility. And I think when I get asked that question, I don't think it's a yes or no answer. I think some parts of the industry are for sure in a bubble. And I picked, and I think that's the most obvious one, is seed rounds where, on companies that have nothing yet research your product, and I guess it's just on the people, and then people can leave, for example. And so I think it's that's very fragile, and that seems a little bit unsustainable. and perhaps driven from sort of FOMO really in the investment world. So that part is, it remains to be seen if there's a larger bubble with infrastructure and AI build outs. I mean, the numbers we're talking about is enormous, right? The power and infrastructure of data center build outs, even for the biggest companies. So there could be a bubble there too. My job is, I don't worry about that very much, because my job as, head of Google DeepMind and senior person at Google is to make sure we win no matter what happens. So if the bubble bursts, we're in a super strong position. We've got all of our main businesses that are producing, a lot of cash flow, and AI is a natural fit. It's not that we don't have to crowbar it in. We're organizing the world's information, and all the products that we build are very useful around that. So AI, of course, should be very useful for that. And obviously there's data flowing the other way. So it's a natural fit. We would just double down on that. And on the other hand, if things continue to go well, demand's there on the new, I would say, AI native products for us, things like Notebook LM and, Enterprise and Gemini app and things like that, then of course we need to be world leading on that too. So either way, I've got to make sure that we're, as Alphabet, we're in the position to win. And I think the market is starting to recognize that, actually.
Robotics. You guys had this partnership with Boston Dynamics where you're going to be doing the deployments in Hyundai factories and also in the DeepMind office. Are we about to have the ChatGPT moment for robotics, or how far away are we from like humanoids in the home, generalized and working well?
I think it's a very exciting moment. I think, again, Google's been involved in, and we've done some robotics for 10 plus years now. Maybe I thought that at the time. I actually advised various people at Google that we were a bit too early because the algorithms weren't there, right? To power. It wasn't. I didn't think it was really a form factor or hardware problem. I thought it was, although that's still there's some parts of that are unsolved. Like the main issue was the algorithm side. And now finally, again, and we've always had this in mind again with Gemini, is we have the models that starting to understand the physical world. And Gemini Robotics is a fine-tuned version of Gemini specifically for robotics. And we want to be the Android of robotics. And but also that I still feel like it's still a bit early, I would say, to scale up to millions of robots. I know some of our competitors are doing that, but I think the body designs aren't quite there in some of the critical aspects. And also the algorithms, I still think there's another, I would say, 24 months of research needed in a sort of more prototype form before I think we're ready for prime time.
Is it productized for you as a Google humanoid?
I feel like I'm actually more interested in, and I've always been interested in industrial applications first. I think it's easier for safety and other reasons. So I suspect that will be the first place that happens. I actually think that humanoids and non-humanoids will be successful, probably 50% of the market each. Humanoids more as I've sort of more convinced by the humanoid story in the last couple of years as I've looked into this a lot. I spent a lot of the last year looking into robotics and the state of the art, because of course, we've designed all our spaces for the human form factor. Right. So we're not going to re-architect, I don't know, hundreds of trillions of dollars of the real world. But on the other hand, I think if you think about factories, automated labs, things like that, which I'm very interested in, you may also have a lot of specialized robots do specialized things with the humanoid robots as the kind of glue between it.
Yeah. Something I haven't heard you talk about as much recently, but is on top of mind, especially with the Merge Labs announcement recently that Sam had, is BCI. How much of that is a part of the AGI puzzle for you? And is Google going to do something there? Is there a kind of a BCI play for you guys?
No, well, not so far. I mean, of course, we have a lot, a lot of neuroscientists, including myself, who are, know a lot about the brain, and it's interesting what's going on. I'm an angel investor in Neuralink and have been for a long time. And I talk to the folks there. They're doing a very impressive thing. So I keep an eye out on it. To me, I feel like it's going to be a very important technology, but I wonder if it'll be post-AGI, actually, before we get something that's good enough that, the average person will want. I think clearly in the near term, there'll be all sorts of medical use cases for it. And I think we're already seeing amazing things like the likes of Neuralink are doing. I think eventually people will be, maybe get their sight back or be able to walk again. I think it's going to be incredible. I mean, it'd be miraculous. But then beyond that, as for an average person who's healthy, will they want something like an implant? I think that would be a higher bar, of course.
So you see it as a post-AGI thing?
The full extent of it, yeah, sure. I mean, it's going to have to be, maybe there's like more non-invasive technologies, ways of doing it. but I think they're very, very hard to design.
How much are you getting asked about post-AGI life here in Davos this week?
Some, I think it's definitely something I'm thinking a lot more about. I mean, I'm still on a timeline of 5 to 10 years, so which is longer than some of my peers, but I think that's I have to have a high bar for what AGI is, being able to do have all the cognitive capabilities we have.
Do you define it more as like what people now call super intelligence?
No, I think that's still a step further.
Okay.
But I do think that being able to create new science and new conjectures, new hypotheses is part of AGI.
Yeah.
And I'd also include physical AI as well as part of it. So robotics really working and things like that. And, I think that's just going to take longer than a lot of people think.
OpenAI has been very vocal that they want to make an AI researcher and they want to try to show that off this year or next. Do you goal DeepMind at all in a similar way? Do you see that as a stepping stone?
Yeah, look, we do. I mean, we've pioneered the whole AI for science space. I think we're, the ones that have done the most work in that, obviously AlphaFold being the clearest example. We're all looking at mathematics at the moment. We're going for, Millennium Prize problems. Obviously, we both got gold medals in the IMO last summer. So I think some very interesting things are going to happen in mathematics, but science is harder than mathematics because mathematics is a little bit of a closed loop language thing where you can, and also you can verify your answer. I think that's harder than, it's easier than like inventing a new part of physics or chemistry where you don't actually know the answer yet. And you can't really check the answer. You have to validate that in a real lab. So doing science, I think, will be harder than doing mathematics. It would probably be more like coding.
A policy question while we're here in Davos. It seems like the U.S., especially right now, has decided to pull back on regulation and kind of let the industry go. And I'm wondering if you think the pendulum will ever swing back. Do you think how transitory do you think this moment we're in is, and do you worry at all about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, worry is the right word. We certainly, keep a close eye on it. That seems to be the mode that everyone's in right now. I think that's partly driven by the US-China dynamic and needing to stay ahead of China, who obviously have lots of very capable teams and are not very far behind, in my opinion. So there's that dynamic, but also, we need to deploy these technologies in a responsible way. And I think right now it's probably fine because the technologies are not that capable. They're impressive, but we know they have a lot of flaws. And so, true agentic systems that you can delegate entire tasks to, for example, aren't ready yet. But I think as we get closer to those kinds of agentic systems and then eventually proto-AGI and AGI, I think, there will be more question marks around what are the guardrails for those types of systems. And then we'll have to see what the geopolitical environment is at that point.
Another area focused on world models. Do you think that feeds in at all to maybe having regulators wake back up to the power of this when we kind of get out of LLMs?
Maybe. I think it's more, I think it's more, actual kind of concrete capabilities in the real world and that have economic effects. I think world models, obviously I work personally on those. We have our Genie models, which I think are the best the state of the art in world models.
Which my understanding is you would like to release, but it's expensive.
It's expensive, yeah, but we're moving towards releasing it in some form. And I'd love to release it generally, but it is expensive for people to use. But it's incredible as well. It's like mind blowing, especially as an ex-game designer, seeing what you can do with these technologies. But it also has an important part to play, I think, in AGI, because again, you've got to the AI systems have to understand the world in a very predictive way in order to kind of plan in the real world. And I think world models will be part of that.
Is that the next turn after LLMs, world models, or like what?
I think that's part of it. I think better memory, continual learning we talked about earlier. I think world models, I think all of those are fruitful avenues to explore. We're working on all of those, and I think maybe all of them will be needed for AGI.
I mean, you told me that there may need to be multiple transformer level breakthroughs to get to AGIs still. And are those in the areas that we've already talked about, or do you think there's whole new areas that the industry is not even paying attention to?
I think definitely in some of the areas we touched on there, 3 or 4 of those, and then there may be 1 or 2 others that we are not generally talked about and maybe not even in scope yet. And of course, I'm not ruling out the fact that just scaling with existing technology could be enough as well. I think there's some good probability mass on that too. But I think what we're doing is kind of an all-court press, pushing forward all of those things, both the pure research, the medium-term research, and the more applied research all at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, on the post-AGI thing, I know you're building a team to also look at this. what the world will look like. Do you have a theory of what the world will start to look like in the next few years?
We have some theories, and I think a lot more work. The world needs to do a lot more thinking about that. I'm just surprised, for example, more top economists aren't working on that. Social scientists. I think also we're going to need great philosophers, I think, as well. Because I think, some things I think we can predict, like a post-scarcity world. If we have AIs that can solve scientific problems, I'd use it to solve, human health and cure all diseases. And we're trying to do that with isomorphic and also new materials, new energy sources. We work closely with Commonwealth Fusion on fusion. I think all of that will then open up space in a really incredible way. And then that will create new opportunities. All these things that was just in the realm of science fiction will become possible. So, Dyson spheres, etc. And so I think that's very plausible if things go well. But then what happens to the human condition and human society in that situation? I think we're in uncharted territory there.
Definitely. Well, Demis, thank you for doing this.
Thank you.